The guards changed shifts at midnight, and that's when Edin pressed the folded note through the iron bars into Guinevere's trembling hand. He was supposed to report any contact with the princess directly to the king. Instead, he whispered 3 words that could get them both killed: tonight. We run. What makes a man throw away his life, his honor, and his future for a woman he's forbidden to even speak to? In 3 hours, Princess Guinevere is supposed to be asleep in her tower, preparing for tomorrow's wedding to a man she's never loved. Instead, she's standing at her window, watching the guard rotations, counting the seconds until Edin returns with 2 horses and a death wish. The king has spies everywhere. The palace walls have ears. One wrong move, one suspicious glance, and they'll both be dragged to the execution block before sunrise. But here's what the king doesn't know: his daughter stopped being his obedient princess the moment Edin's hand touched hers through those iron bars. Now the only question is, will they make it past the gates, or will this forbidden love story end in chains? Before we slip into the shadows with them, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Princess Guinevere Pentious woke to the sound of silk rustling and the oppressive weight of expectation. Her ladies-in-waiting moved through the chamber like ghosts, pulling back heavy velvet curtains to reveal another perfect, suffocating day. Sunlight poured across marble floors that had never known the warmth of bare feet, only the cold kiss of jeweled slippers. "Your Highness, the seamstress awaits," Lady Margot announced, her voice as empty as the compliment she'd offer later. Guinevere nodded, rising from the bed that felt more like a display piece than a place of rest. Every movement was choreographed, every breath measured. She was dressed in layers of crimson and gold, colors chosen not by her, but by advisors who understood that a princess was a symbol before she was ever a person. The morning passed in the usual suffocating ritual. Breakfast with her mother, Queen Ilara, who spoke only of posture, propriety, and the political necessity of the upcoming union. A walk through the gardens followed, where even the roses seemed trapped behind their manicured hedges, their thorns clipped so as not to offend the royal touch. Every person she passed bowed low, yet none met her eyes. She was a ghost in her own home, a figurine to be moved across a political chessboard. A music lesson followed, where she played notes that had been selected for her by a committee before she was even born, the melody as hollow as the life she was expected to lead. It was during the midday embroidery session, her fingers mechanically stitching intricate patterns into fabric she would never wear, that her father entered unannounced. The king never entered unannounced. The air in the room seemed to freeze as his heavy boots clicked against the stone. "Leave us," he commanded, and the ladies scattered like startled birds, their heads bowed low. Guinevere's hand stilled on the embroidery hoop, her heart already knowing that whatever came next would be terrible. "The wedding has been moved forward," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Lord Balthasar's kingdom faces unrest on their northern border. The alliance must be solidified immediately to ensure our joint military response. You'll marry this Sunday instead of next month." The needle slipped, pricking her finger. A single drop of blood bloomed on the white fabric like a crimson accusation. "This Sunday?" "Father, that's 4 days, 3 days," he corrected, his eyes cold as flint. "Today is Thursday. The ceremony is Sunday at dawn." He moved to the window, his back to her, looking out over the kingdom he treated like a collection of assets. "The arrangements are already being made. Your gown is being altered. The guests have been notified by messenger. Lord Balthasar arrives tomorrow evening. And I'm the last to know." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, though her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. "You're the bride. Your only concern is to appear radiant, obedient, and fertile." He turned then, his eyes empty of any paternal warmth. "This marriage secures peace for thousands of our subjects. Your personal feelings are irrelevant, as they have always been." "My personal feelings," she repeated softly, feeling something crack inside her chest. "As if I'm allowed to have any. As if I am anything more to you than a bargaining chip. You're a princess, Guinevere. You were never meant to have feelings. You were meant to have purpose. Do not forget the blood that runs through your veins. He moved toward the door, the conversation already over in his mind. The final fitting is tomorrow. Don't disappoint me. The peace of the realm depends on your cooperation. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty chamber. Guinevere realized she'd been bleeding into this fabric her entire life, stitching herself into patterns chosen by others. She had 3 days to either accept her execution by marriage or find another way. Her eyes drifted to the courtyard below where Edin would be standing in exactly 4 hours, pretending not to watch her tower. The moon gardens were forbidden after dark, a rule Guinevere had never broken until tonight. She moved through the hedgerows like a ghost in white linen, her hair unbound and her feet bare against cold stone. The night air was sharp, smelling of damp earth and blooming jasmine. Every rustle of a leaf sounded like a sentry's footstep. She found the fountain at the garden's heart, sinking onto its edge as tears finally came, silent, furious tears that tasted like years of swallowed words and suppressed dreams. Your Highness. Edin stood 10 feet away, his dark uniform blending with the shadows of the weeping willow, his hand on his sword hilt, not in threat, but in that constant vigilance that defined him. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice a low rumble. Neither should you, she replied, wiping her eyes. I saw you leave the tower, he said, taking a step closer, breaking every protocol he'd sworn to uphold. I couldn't let you wander alone. The palace is full of eyes that do not sleep. Then I suppose we're both rebels tonight, she added, her voice trembling. He moved close enough that she could see the conflict in his dark eyes, the battle between his sworn duty and the man he was behind the armor. The wedding. It's been moved to Sunday, she said, her voice cracking as the reality set in. 3 days, Edin. I have 3 days before I become someone else's property. Before I am locked in a fortress in the north and forgotten by everyone but the man who bought me. The king has no right to barter you like cattle, Edin began, his jaw tightening. The king has every right. That's the problem, she said. I'm not a person to him. I'm a treaty written in silk and gold. I am a piece of land, a trade route, a military alliance. You're more than that, Edin whispered, his control finally fracturing. Every day I stand outside your door, guarding a room that feels like a cell, and all I can think is that none of them see you. The real you. The woman who reads banned philosophy books in the dead of night and treats the lowest kitchen servants like they are human beings. Edin gestured between them, his hand trembling slightly. I know this can never exist outside of stolen moments in the dark, but the thought of you married to that man, trapped in another gilded cage, it's a slow death, Guinevere. Then help me escape it, she pleaded, her fingers catching the rough fabric of his sleeve. I'm asking if you're brave enough to help me become something other than a princess. If you're brave enough to throw away your rank for a life of nothing but uncertainty. She found his hand, her skin pale against his scarred knuckles. Because I can't do this anymore. If I'm going to suffocate, I'd rather it be trying to run than standing still while they bury me. If we do this, there's no going back, he said quietly, his gaze searching hers for any sign of hesitation. They'll hunt us. Your father will send his best trackers. There will be no mercy for either of us. I know. We could die, he warned. I'm already dying. At least this way, I'd die as Guinevere, not as a Duchess of the North. He pulled her against him, crossing every line of propriety, his arms wrapping around her with a strength that felt like the only solid thing in her world. 3 days, he whispered into her hair. I'll get you out. I swear it on my life. The wedding gown later waited on the dressmaker's form like a beautiful, golden threat. Guinevere stood in the fitting room while 3 seamstresses circled her like vultures, their mouths full of pins. The gown was a masterpiece of crimson silk and gold embroidery, each stitch representing a day of her life she would never get back. The bodice was tight, structured with whalebone that made breathing an effort, forcing her to take shallow, panicked breaths. The train stretched behind her for 12 feet, a crimson river that required 2 attendants just to manage. You'll be the most beautiful bride the kingdom has ever seen, Lady Margot cooed from her velvet chair. Beautiful. As if beauty could compensate for a life of quiet desperation. The head seamstress fastened the final clasp at her throat, a golden collar studded with rubies that felt like a noose drawn tight. Guinevere caught her reflection and barely recognized the girl staring back. She looked like a queen, but she felt like a corpse prepared for a wake. They draped the crimson lace veil over her head, and the world turned into a red haze. The lace obscured her vision, turning the palace walls into shadows. This was how they wanted her, beautiful, blind, and silent. "Can you breathe adequately, Your Highness?" the seamstress asked. "It's fine," Guinevere lied, her voice sounding far away. She stared at her reflection and felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. This dress was a shroud. She memorized every clasp and button, every weight and fold of this crimson prison, knowing that by Sunday morning, she would be miles away. As they removed the gown, she made a mental inventory of the jeweled rings and diamond collar she would leave behind on the vanity. "Same time tomorrow," Lady Margot said. "For the final jewels." Of course, Guinevere smiled. Lies were beginning to taste like the only truth she had left. The servant tunnels smelled of damp stone, old tallow, and centuries of secrets. Guinevere followed Edin through the narrow passage, her hand trailing along the cold wall to keep her balance. She'd never known these corridors existed, veins running beneath the palace's polished marble, escape routes built by paranoid kings who feared their own people. Edin stopped at an intersection where the air grew colder and spread a hand-drawn map against the stone. "This is the palace," he said, his voice hushed. "These lines are the tunnels. This one leads from the old wine cellar, the one they say is haunted, to a gate overgrown with ivy on the eastern wall. It's hidden from the guard towers. Beyond the gate lay the dense forest and a village 7 miles north where he had a contact." Saturday night. Midnight, Edin said, his eyes meeting hers in the lantern light. "The guard rotation changes at 11:45. There's a gap. We'll have exactly 12 minutes to reach the gate before the next patrol begins their sweep." 12 minutes, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "It's enough if we move fast and don't look back," he replied. "But Guinevere, you need to understand the magnitude of this," he warned. "I'd rather die running through the mud than live as a treaty signed in blood," she said. "Your father will send the royal hounds," Edin warned. "Then we'll need to be faster than the hounds." She was tired of being a protected object. Saturday at midnight. The wine cellar, she confirmed. She would claim exhaustion to her ladies-in-waiting, knowing they were too used to her obedience to question her. She pulled off her mother's gold engagement ring, a constant weight on her finger, and pressed it into Edin's palm. It felt like shedding a layer of skin. "I don't want any piece of that life following us into the woods. I want to start with nothing. 2 days. Then I stop being Princess Guinevere forever." "And become what?" Edin asked. "Whoever I decide to be when the sun rises," she answered. Friday evening brought a cold, relentless rain that turned the palace courtyards into grey mirrors. Guinevere stood at her window, watching water stream down the glass. The sky seemed to be mourning for her. Edin moved below, his silhouette sharp against the rain-slicked stone. He'd switched shifts with a younger guard just to see her one last time before the end. He tilted his head toward the eastern corridor, a subtle sign she understood. She waited until the candles in the hallway were dimmed and her ladies were asleep, then she wrapped herself in a dark, wool cloak and slipped into the shadows. She reached the ornate black bars of the garden gate as Edin emerged from the other side, his hair plastered to his forehead. "I'm terrified, Guinevere," he whispered, reaching through the bars. "I'm terrified I won't be enough to keep you safe. We're both terrified. That's the only way we know this is real," she said, her fingers lacing through his. Edin made her promise that if they were caught, she would blame him entirely. He wanted her to live, even if it was in the cage. "I don't want mercy. I want the open road," she replied. She drew a small ceremonial dagger from her belt, the blade glinting. "Blood oath," she said, her voice steady. She drew the sharp edge across her palm, the sting a welcome distraction from the fear. Edin did the same without a word. They joined their bleeding hands through the bars, the heat of their blood mingling in the cold rain. I swear that I choose this path. I choose you. I choose the life we will build together, she said. Edin swore to be her sword and her shield, and to love the woman, not the title. They stood there for a long time, the rain washing over their joined hands, diluting the red but not the promise. Tomorrow night, she whispered. Tomorrow night, he confirmed. When she looked at her palm in the moonlight later, the thin red line was a permanent mark of her rebellion. For the first time, she felt like her life actually belonged to her. Saturday morning arrived with her father's unexpected presence at the breakfast table. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. He sat across from her, watching her with a surgical, cold intensity. You seem distracted, daughter, he said, cutting into a piece of pheasant. I'm told you've been wandering the gardens at odd hours. That you seem preoccupied with the shadows. Her blood turned to ice, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. I have eyes everywhere in this palace, Guinevere. Did you truly believe your movements went unnoticed? He then spoke Edin's name, the sound of it like a death sentence. The guard Edin has shown an unusual interest in your tower. I've had him reassigned to the outer wall effective immediately. He will be far from your sight. The words were a physical blow to her chest. Their plan relied on his proximity. Tomorrow, you marry Lord Balthasar, the king stated, his voice final. Whatever foolish notions of romance or escape you've entertained, abandon them. Your path is set by the stars and by my hand. Guinevere met his gaze and played the role of the broken, obedient daughter. But inside, her mind was a whirlwind of new calculations. Edin was too far to meet her at the wine cellar now. She would have to navigate the first half of the tunnels alone. She studied the map in her mind, tracing every turn. She had to try. The alternative was a slow, golden death. Find me, she whispered to the empty room later that afternoon, pressing her scarred palm against the window. I will be at the gate. That evening, the ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles, the light reflecting off the diamonds she wore. Guinevere stood at the top of the grand staircase, her heart a drum. Lord Balthasar waited at the bottom, his smile hungry. Tomorrow, all of this becomes mine, he said, taking her hand. The evening was a blur of orchestrated torture. She danced with her father, then with Balthasar, who whispered of the heirs she would provide for his house. She searched the perimeter of the room frantically and finally saw Edin near the servants' entrance, disguised in a lower-rank uniform. Their eyes locked for 3 precious seconds, a lifetime of understanding in a single glance. He pressed his hand to his heart, the signal that despite the reassignment, he would be at the gate. Balthasar pulled her into a final waltz, his breath smelling of wine. He told her he preferred his wives compliant and quiet. I live to serve, my lord, she said, the lie tasting like the sweetest wine. 7 hours remained. As the ballroom emptied and the candles were snuffed out, Guinevere touched the scar on her palm. Tonight, the princess would die, and a woman would be born. At the stroke of midnight, the bells tolled, and Guinevere swapped her heavy silk for a stolen, grey servant's dress. She left her jewelry and her signet ring on the vanity, her final message to her father. She slipped into the tunnels through the wine cellar, the air thick with the smell of old oak and dust. She was swallowed by absolute darkness, moving by the light of a single, guttering candle. Every drip of water sounded like a guard's footstep. Every shadow seemed to reach for her. The tunnel felt miles long, the walls closing in. When she finally reached the rusted eastern gate, it was jammed. She threw her weight against it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Panic nearly took her until Edin's hand reached through the ivy from the outside and wrenched it open. You're here, he breathed, his face streaked with dirt. He had fought his way across the outer wall to reach her. I'm here, she said. And I'm never going back. They ran through the forest, the ground slick with mud and fallen leaves. The trees seemed to lean in, sheltering them from the palace's light. They reached a hidden clearing where 2 sturdy horses were tethered. Once we mount, we don't stop for anything, Edin said, checking the cinches. Just as they swung into the saddles, the first alarm bells began to toll from the palace towers, a frantic, metallic clanging that echoed through the valley. They kicked their horses into a gallop, two shadows racing through the trees toward a border they hoped to reach before dawn. The wind bit at her face, but she didn't care. She was moving faster than her life had ever allowed. Dawn broke as they reached the ancient stone bridge over the Great Gorge, the final boundary of the kingdom. "Once we cross that bridge, we're in the free territories," Edin shouted over the wind. "The king has no power there." Suddenly, a thunder of hooves came from behind. Captain Thorn and 6 royal guards emerged from the tree line, their horses foaming at the mouth. "Halt! In the name of the king!" Thorn's voice boomed. "Return peacefully, and the king will show mercy to the girl." Thorn shouted. "The girl is gone," she yelled back. "And I'm choosing myself." They reached the far side of the bridge just as the guards reached the near end. "I chose this. I chose the dirt and the rain over your gilded prison." Guinevere's voice rang out across the chasm. Captain Thorn signaled his men to dismount and cross on foot. Edin pulled a heavy knife to cut the bridge's support ropes, ancient hemp that held the only path back. Guinevere pulled her own blade and moved to the opposite rope. "Together," she said, her eyes fixed on his. They cut simultaneously, the rope snapping with the sound of a whip. The center of the bridge collapsed into the gorge, falling hundreds of feet into the rushing river below. Captain Thorn stood at the edge of the abyss, his face a mask of fury. Guinevere felt a weight lift off her soul that she hadn't even known she was carrying. She was lighter than air. She turned her horse away from the ruins of her old life and toward the rising sun. "What now?" Edin asked softly, the world finally quiet. Guinevere looked at her hands, real hands, scarred and dirty, finally her own. "Now," she said, a smile breaking across her face that reached her eyes, "we find out who I actually am." Ahead, the horizon was wide, and for the first time in 23 years, everything was possible.